Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to come at you with my Yarok the Desecrated deck profile. This is a deck that I made about 3 years ago, 2.5 give or take, and I never uploaded the deck profile. And then since I've come back this year, strong into Magic, into Commander, I rebuilt this deck. This deck just kind of came out of nowhere for me to rebuild. I just all of a sudden was like, man, I really want to play Yarok again. And I built the deck back up, and I found, I would say, a decent amount of, I don't want to say new cards, but just newer cards to the deck that I wasn't playing before. I might mention them here or there, and I might mention, hey, this is a staple of Yarok regardless. But yeah, let's get into it. So lands, as you guys know from the channel, I run only basics. You can run whatever you want. If the consistencies don't work for you, this is how I like to run my decks. 13 forests, 13 islands, 13 swamps. Yarok, for anyone that doesn't know, if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. It's a 3/5 with Death Touch and Lifelink for 5 mana. It's really good. Sultai, I was looking for what commander I wanted to make in those colors a couple years back. And as soon as I saw Yarok, I was like, that's what I want to make. I was like, because enter the battlefield effects, like flickering, looks like so much fun. And the cool thing about Yarok is you don't run white, so there's a lot of like flicker staples that you don't see. So a Yarok deck is kind of unique in what you run. Okay, so let's get to the creatures. This is definitely a creature-heavy deck. We definitely play more creatures than anything else by far. So let's get into it. 1-drop Ruin Crab. So I just uploaded my Zur the Enchanter deck profile, and I ran a Ruin Crab in there. While that's like Mill is a strong theme in that deck, Mill is very much more of a sub-theme in this deck. And but the landfall, I can't deny the landfall ability. It's just so easy to mill somebody with the amount of lands that we get and the additional triggers. So Ruin Crab, each opponent mills 3 cards whenever you have a land drop. Okay, so I'm going to put all these next cards together. So I got Burglar Rat, Elderfang Disciple, Virus Beetle. All these cards say the same thing. When they enter the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. So I love discard as a theme as far as making my opponents discard cards. And I have a Grixis deck that I'll showcase here soon, hopefully, in the next, I would say, hopefully month or two. It's not ready just yet, but basically it's focused on discard. These cards I used to try to run in there, but I had no way of flickering them or at least consistently doing it. So I was like, well, I want to run these in something. And I've tried this before in Yarok, but this time I feel like I really have a solid build that works for it. I think the last time that I had Yarok, I don't think Virus Beetle had come out yet out of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So I love these cards in here because, you know, it's one thing if you play a low drop creature that says, hey, you get to draw a card when it enters the battlefield. That's good. But being able to take a card out of all your opponent's hands, so if you got 3 opponents, I think the card advantage is just better that way. And that happens twice, so it'd be 2 cards. So these are all 3. I really like them, and obviously your opponent's never going to like to see those, but I do. Okay, we're on to the 3 drops. Azusa, Lost But Seeking. I don't want to be one of those guys that runs an Azusa in every green deck. You totally could, but obviously the reason why I like it in this deck is because we have draw power and we run Landfall, so we need to be able to play more lands, and Azusa's probably my favorite card in the game to do that. Elvish Rejuvenator. So the fact that it's a green and it's 3 mana or less and not a legendary, that has synergy. I'll show you here in a bit. But Rejuvenator, it's a 1/1. There's also some synergies there. But when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library, put a land from among them onto the battlefield, tap it, the rest of the bottom library in a random order. We play 39 lands. So the odds of us hitting one and then a second one off the additional trigger of Yarok is very likely. Okay, we got Eternal Witness. So, you know, our flicker cards are very important, our instants that can do it. And, you know, I thought before about running like Archaeomancer to be able to grab that stuff back, but then I thought about it and I was like, why wouldn't I just play E-Witness since I'm playing green? I mean, it's so versatile, it can grab anything back. And I know E-Witness is kind of a boring card to some people, but in this deck, you do need the versatility of being able to grab anything that you might possibly need. Farhaven Elf. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a base land, put it on the battlefield, tap. We like to ramp. You know, a lot of people in creature-heavy decks, they like to run creatures that do ramp. Most of the time, I still don't go for that because I'm not a big fan of that. But in this deck, I can't deny it because of the ETB effects. Okay, here's a new card that I wasn't running before. Priest of Gix. I didn't even know that this card existed. When it enters the battlefield, add 3 black to your mana pool. Obviously, that mana will go away as phases end. Excuse me, I'm a little stuffed up. But, I mean, we can't deny playing this card and getting 6 black, potentially. I mean, even if you don't have a ton of black cards in your hand, the fact that you can just use that mana as the generic mana cost is great. So I'm really happy I found that one. Reclamation Sage. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Good old Rex Sage, can't argue with that. A card that I don't run anymore, I was running an Acidic Slime for the longest time because I like the concept of being able to pop my opponent's lands, but I just had to make room for other stuff, and it eventually had to hit the cutting room floor. And I know a lot of people have cut Acidic Slime a long time ago, but for me, is what it is. Here's a spicy tech that I like in this deck, Shaman of the Pack. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to the number of elves you control. We do have a decent amount of elves, but that's not really what I'm talking about. There's a cool combo. I'm not going to say it's super likely, but it's a way where we could burn out our opponent. This is like just a little sub package of like, hey, if this happens, it'd be great, but we can win without it. I'll show you here in a second. Wood Elves, that's another elf, but enters the battlefield, search your library for a forest, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle your library. Because I don't play dual lands, this card maybe is not as good as everybody else runs it in their non-basic land decks. But in this deck, even still, being able to get lands when it enters the battlefield that don't come in tapped, huge. So Wood Elves is probably your best target. Whenever you can go grab like a little creature that's 3 mana or less, it's probably your best target. Because we play so much green in here that just being able to get forests untapped is great. All right, another new card. I didn't even know this card existed. I forgot it came out of Baldur's Gate. Displacer Kitten. This card is probably the best flicker support we've gotten, I guess, in a little over a year. The last good one that we really got, and it wasn't for these colors, but was the Teleportation Circle that was white. And for the life of me, I can't think of what set that came out of. But anyway, Displacer Kitten. Once I read this card, I was like, wow. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to one target non-land permanent you control. That's non-land permanent, not just creature. Then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So good. So we already play, because we're playing green, we run a ton of ramp cards. We run flicker cards anyway that are not creatures. So the fact that Displacer Kitten is going to be able to just flicker, it's honestly probably, you know, as Mitch from Commander's Chords would say, the golden pick of the deck. This is probably the golden pick of the deck, if I'm being honest, because it can just get nuts. We only played 2 4-drop creatures. Ravenous Chupacabra, I'm sorry, but I just love this card. It's out of Rivals of Ixalan, but it just puts in work. When there's the battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls. That's good. And when you can double it, the cost is just that much better. Direfleet Ravager, this is a card I tried for a little bit with my last build, and then I went away from it, and then now I'm like, why did I go away from this card? Whenever it enters the battlefield, each player loses a third of his or her life rounded up. It also has Menace and Death Touch, which is nice. But that effect, when it gets doubled, and then if you had like another, like a Panharmonicon on top of that, think about that. Take an opponent's life point that's at 40, they lose a third of it, rounded up, so that would be 13, but then rounded up to 14, so they'd be at 26. Then if it happens again, 26 divided by 3 would be 8 point something, so that'll be rounded up to 9. So they'd go from 26 minus 9 to 17 life, and then if you had the Panharmonicon with Yarok to do it again, 17? So 17 divided by 3 is 5 point something. So that would get rounded up to 6. So then you'd be at 11. So they'd be at 11 life just by getting this out with Yarok and Panharmonicon. That is nuts. And Direfleet Ravager, I just can't deny how good it is. Plus, like I said, Menace, Death Touch on top of it. Really good. Okay, here's the card, Nath of the Giltleaf, that the reason why I ran those 2-drop, like, you know, Burglar Rats and Elderfang Disciple and the Beetle, Virus Beetle. So, the Shaman of the Pack. This is the card that kind of makes all that stuff worth running. Don't get me wrong, the little 2-drops, you could run those in a Yarok deck, and it'd just be helpful to get cards out of your opponent's hand. But I've always wanted to run this guy in something. I used to try it in my Kethis the Hidden Hand deck because it was legendary, but I think this works better as just a little sub thing. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may have target opponent discard a card at random. Okay, that's cool, a little added bonus. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you may create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. So this is how with Shaman of the Pack, we can get a bunch of elves on the board if we can rip cards out of our opponent's hand like crazy. Don't get me wrong, guys, like, you could go, wow, how consistent is that? Yeah, no, it might be, like, not that consistent at all, but my thing is, this is a Yarok deck. We already have so many ways of just blowing our opponents out of the water with advantage or just, like, doing degenerate stuff that I kind of like this little like theme of like, oh, well, you know, it'd be fun if I could do that, but, you know, if it doesn't happen, oh well. I mean, this is Commander after all. The next card is not so fun. I mean, it is for us, but not for them. Obnixilis the Fallen. Probably the best landfall card in the deck. Maybe. I don't know. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, have target player lose 3 life. If you do, put 3+1/+1 counters on Obnixilis. That gets out of hand because if you have Yarok on the battlefield, it's target player loses 6 life, and you put 6+1/+1 counters on this for every land drop. Ridiculous. Peregrine Drake, I know that people use this for degenerate combos, and I'm not going to lie, like, it has happened before where I basically just kind of had an infinite amount of mana. I don't like infinites at all, so to my knowledge, I don't have many ways of just infinite flickering this card. I really don't. But it can get us a lot of advantage. So Peregrine Drake, when it enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. With Yarok, that gets doubled up to 10. Okay, Phyrexian Delver. I really love this card in this deck. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You lose life equal to that card's mana cost. Don't get me wrong. Are you in danger of sometimes maybe draining yourself a little too much? Sure. But if I recall, we do have some life gain in this deck, so we have a way of kind of getting that back. But it's the best resurrection card in our deck as far as getting creatures back, I feel like. Tatioba, Benthic Druid. Whenever a land enters the battlefield from your control, you can gain 1 life, draw a card. That's a way to gain some life, but really it's just for the card draw. And like I said, even though that doesn't say Landfall, that is a land triggering ability. AC, I don't run a Simic deck. Any deck that runs Simic colors, I don't run a deck without running AC in it. That being said, AC is especially good in this deck. Play an additional land each of your turns. That's amazing. And whenever a land enters your battlefield control, you can draw a card. Obviously, that'll get doubled to 2. It's just great. We do like doubling up our landfall triggers. So we got Ancient Green Warden. You may play lands from your graveyard. It also has reach. And if a land enters the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, the ability triggers an additional time. I don't have to tell you why that's good in a Yarok deck. So I showed this card off the other day in my Zur deck, and then a couple weeks back in my Xyrus, Writhing Storm deck. So this is the last deck that I put it in. So it's only 3 right now. But I found this card like maybe 2 months ago, and I've been enamored with it. I think it's really good. And in this deck, so whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield you control, tap target creature and opponent controls. So we don't have any like tap synergies necessarily in this deck, but just the fact that if I'm able to, like, let's say, get a bunch of tokens out with the elves, or if I'm able to just, cast a bunch of little small creatures or whatever, that ability is just so good. It's just, it's ridiculous. I mean, being able to, like, if we need to get through with combat, because let's be honest, my Yarok deck is not built to just run people over. It's more going to do landfall triggers and drain people, or just get so much advantage that they can't handle it, or I bounce things back. So it's just kind of cool that I have this as an option to kind of clear the way so I can get some damage in. So I really like that card. And by the way, if you guys are wondering, like, oh, the mana cost for that 6 mana, that's a lot. This is a Yarok deck. We're running green. We have a lot of ways to ramp and reduce costs, all that kind of stuff. One of my favorite cards in the deck, maybe my favorite, Massacre Worm. I love the hollow that this looks like, the Core 21. So when it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponent's control get -2/-2. With the Yarok out, that's -4/-4. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. We can put a lot of damage out, but we can just wipe the board with this. Also, keep in mind the 3 black mana pips. We have a card that can get that out pretty easily. Noxious Gearhulk. The best Gearhulk, at least for this deck. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. Yet again, another card that we can gain life with that can kind of offset that Phyrexian Delver. Okay, look, like a lot of people like, why can't I think of the card? It's a 5 mana that you play that lets you, when it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. It's a fish-looking thing. Can't think of it for the life of me. Okay, I don't play that in here. I play Phyrexian Gargantua, and I'll tell you why. So 6 mana, 4/4, enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life. Okay, so it loses 2 life, which that fish, which, like I said, for the life of me, I can't think of. You lose 2 life as opposed to not having to lose life. It costs 1 more mana. The stats are slightly better. It doesn't have flying. Okay, the reason why we run it is we have synergies with the mana cost of things needing to be that certain mana cost. And we need more, like that Priest of Gix, like we need more cards that have black mana pips. And I found this one, and I just honestly think it's perfect. So I run this. You can run whatever you want. It's up to you. Okay, Rampaging Balos. Landfall, when a land enters the battlefield under control, you make a 4/4 green beast token. It has trample to 6. This is a great card in this deck. I honestly think it's a great card in general. Royal Elemental, gotta run this. When a land enters the battlefield under control, gain control of target creature for as long as you control a Royal Elemental. It has flying. We can get that card out pretty easily. Sire of Stagnation has no color. I mean, I don't really like Devoid as far as, like, I don't like that it says it has no color, because I run the medallions in here, and they don't reduce that because it's not considered a color, I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong on that in the comments, but whenever a land enters the battlefield under opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of his or her library, and you draw 2 cards. So that will get doubled with Yarok, which is great. Soul the Harvest, one of the best draw cards in the game. We don't play a ton of tokens. So it's a 6/6 with trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield you control, you may draw a card. That will happen twice with Yarok out. Woodland Bellower. This is how you get some combos going. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a non-legendary green creature, convert a mana cost 3 or less, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So we can get Shaman of the Pack with that. We can get Wood Elves or Rexage or a few other things that are interesting that you saw earlier. Hornet Queen. We can make tokens with this. 2/2 Flying Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, make 4 1/1 insect tokens with Flying and Death Touch. That's great. Sphinx Mindbreaker. Like, you know, I showed we had that Ruin Crab earlier. Well, this card is another way we can mill. Enters the battlefield, each opponent puts the top 10 cards of their library in the graveyard. In this deck, we can double that to 20 and possibly get up to 30 every time it enters the battlefield. Make each opponent mill 30. That's great. New card that I didn't have before. Somberwald Beastmaster. I didn't realize this card existed. When it enters the battlefield, you make a 2/2 wolf, a 3/3 beast, a 4/4 beast, and then creature tokens you control have Death Touch. Okay, it also has 1/1 in its stat line. Keep that in mind. I'm going to bring that up here in a little bit. Hoverguard Sweepers. This is a card that I think most people don't like, but I do. So in decks like this, so anything that like... So, you know, there's creatures that will say when it enters the battle, there's like 3 drops to say when it enters the battlefield, bounce 1 target creature. And so you may be thinking, well, for the mana value, that's just better. The way I feel about it is the more the creature does when it enters the battlefield, it gets me that much more whenever I flicker it. So that's why I like running the bigger ones, because if this enters the battlefield, I bounce up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hand. If I have Yarok, that's 4 creatures. And then if I have a way to flicker it, that's another 4 creatures. So I really like Hoverguard Sweepers. You do not have to run it, but I like it. And then the last creature is Terrastodon. I think this is a staple for a Yarok deck. It allows you to blow up lands. That's really good. When it enters the battlefield, you can destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put in a graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So basically, we can't pop creatures, but we can pop any other permanent. So if we have lands that we need to get rid of, it says just destroy up to 3. We can do 6 with Yarok and blow up like 6 lands and be like, okay, well, here's 6 elephants, but I don't care. My stuff's bigger, stronger, or if I have creature removal, whatever. I can get rid of enchantments that way, artifacts, you name it, we can get rid of it. It's really versatile, good stat line, everything. Okay, so that's it for the creatures. Let's go to the sorceries. Farseek, ramp card, don't need to explain that one. Neoform, so... I like Neoform in general as a card, but especially in this deck because we just want the ETB effect. So we sack a creature, and then we can go up 1 equal to its converted mana cost. So if we sacked a 2 mana creature, we can get a 3 mana creature from the deck. And then the Neoform puts a +1/+1 on the new creature that we get out. So once again, we can get out a cheap creature, get its ETB effect, and then just use Neoform and like just upgrade it, basically. Rampant Growth, we like to ramp. Eldritch Evolution, once again, this is a card that I like in most of my green decks, but it's especially good in this deck. It's like Neoform, except it doesn't do a +1/+1. It exiles after you play it, but you can go up to 2 more mana for whatever that creature's mana cost is. So, you know, we can sack a 3-drop and get a 5-drop out. Like I said, stuff like that. Kodama's Reach, I've told you guys before, I prefer Cultivate. I don't run them both in the same deck. I don't have another Cultivate. They're all in other decks. I don't like... It says Arcane. It kind of like bothers me. I guess I have OCD or something. Explosive Veggies. I've talked about this before in my decks, but basically because I'm running a 3-color deck and because they're all basic lands, Explosive Veggies gets me if I'm running short on islands or swamps. This can allow me some versatility, or forest for that matter. If I need more forest, I can get that too. Skyshroud Claim. I've talked about this before. I prefer this over Nature's Lore or 3 Visits. That's just me personally. Boundless Realms, this is a green staple for me to be able to ramp. Whatever my current land count is, I play Boundless Realms, and I go grab that many more basics for my deck onto the battlefield. Emergent Ultimatum. If you're running a Yarok deck, if you're running Sultai in general, you got to run Emergent Ultimatum, I feel like. Search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards, not creatures, cards, with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle that card into your library. You may cast the other cards without paying their mana cost. This thing gets exiled once it's done. So... I showed up, I mean, technically you can go with a bunch of different combinations because obviously there's, you know, something might have 7 mana like that Somberwald thing, and basically you could get that out because it technically is monocolored. I like to get out things that have like 3 mana pips just to feel like I'm getting like my money's worth. So I have things like Hornet Queen, I have Royal Elemental, I have Massacre Worm, you've seen those already. I have, you know, other things, including this next card. Reshape the Earth. So this you can get off Emergent Ultimatum, and it really puts your opponent in a pickle with all our Landfall triggers. They really don't ever want to see this card go off. So they normally will allow a Royal Elemental and a Massacre Worm or whatever combo you want to do. So it's really cool. So this says pay 9, search your library for up to 10 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. In a non-basic land deck, I'm sure this card's even that much better. But in our deck, it doesn't even matter. Just the Landfall alone is just, it's amazing. Okay, let's do the artifacts. We got the medallions, Emerald Medallion, Jet Medallion, Sapphire Medallion, which just came in this morning. It's why I've been waiting to do this deck profile. Really happy about that. As I said, I run the medallions in my decks if the commander has generic mana cost to get reduced. So it works for me. If you guys don't want to do that, that's fine. But the way I kind of justify it is like, look, if I just play basic lands, I can go pay the money for the medallions. If I was playing a bunch of non-basic lands that cost money, I probably wouldn't be able to afford them. But I feel like the cost is just better that way. Semblance Anvil. So I tried Heartless Summoning once upon a time, and I love that card, Heartless Summoning. Absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite enchantments. But there's a card I'll show you here in a second that if you have Heartless Summoning out, because it's doing the stat reductions, it screws up everything, and I just was like, I don't want to go through that again. Plus, we have some one toughness creatures that it would kill, so I don't want to see that. So Semblance Anvil says, enters the battlefield, exile a non-land card from your hand. Spells you cast that share a card type with that exiled card cost 2 less to cast. So if you exile an artifact creature, it actually reduces the cost of your artifacts and your creatures at the same time. So that's pretty cool. We only run 2 artifact creatures. We run Noxious Gearhulk and the Virus Beetle. So those are your ideal targets. But if you can't do that, just go for creature because we play the most creatures, so that's what we want to reduce the cost of. There's not too many cards that reduce generic mana cost of creatures. Semblance Anvil is one of my favorites. Panharmonicon, because it's basically our commander, but on an artifact, it's not exactly the same because it doesn't work with landfall triggers, and it doesn't. Is that it? Pretty much, I guess. Our enchantments. If enchantments have an ETB effect, I guess Panharmonicon wouldn't do anything with that. But that's about it. And then lastly, we got Conjurer's Closet. Because it's a flicker deck, you got to do it at the beginning of your end step. Exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under your control. So that's good. Okay, we got 4 enchantments. Retreat to Hagra. This is a card that I've had for a while, but I finally was like, well, let me try it again in this deck, and it really works wonders. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, you can either target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch on turn. We never do that effect. We're always doing the landfall of each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It keeps you in the game, but it can drain your opponent pretty quick. Guardian Project. This is a green card you could run in any green deck in Commander because it would work with any non-token creature you play because they all have different names, but in this deck especially, I wanted to put it in here because, yes, we need the draw power, and we'd get double the draws for just playing what we're normally going to be doing anyway. Polluted Bonds. I know this card's expensive. It's like 20-something or $30 at this point. But Polluted Bonds, I feel like you got to run it in this deck. Whenever a land comes into play under opponent's control, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Yet again, another card that allows us to gain life. But yeah, that really can get annoying for our opponents. The sad thing is I just hardly ever draw this card. That's what ticks me off. The last one... Wild Pair, my favorite green enchantment and one of my favorite green cards in general. Normally when I'm playing a green deck, I want to put Wild Pair in there. I just have to make sure the pairings are right and that it works with the deck. But this is the card I was mentioning that Heartless Summoning completely screws up because the creature's power and toughness on the board gets jacked up, and sometimes the pairings that you did have in mind don't work. The numbers don't line up properly, but Wild Pair is just a great card, like I said, especially in this deck. This works with Yarok, so this effect of whenever the creature enters the battlefield, if you cast it, search a library for a creature with total power toughness that's the same, put it on the battlefield. That will happen again because of Yarok, so that's great. Okay, lastly, we have the instance. We run 4 of them. They're all blue. We got an Essence Flux. In my opinion, it's the best flicker card outside of, like, in white. I forgot what that... I think it's just called Ghostly... No, it's not Ghostly Flicker. It's another card. But anyway, Essence Flux is great. We don't really have any spirits in here, so that's not really going to matter. But you just flicker a creature, return it instantly to the battlefield. If it's a spirit, it gets a +1/+1. But for 1 blue, can't argue with that. Next, we got Displace. We can flicker up to 2 target creatures and then return to the battlefield instantly. I prefer the flicker cards that say you can return instantly. If I can't do that, like if it doesn't come back instantly, I'm okay with running a Conjurer's Closet because it's a card that doesn't go away. But in general, an instant that lets me flicker, if it doesn't bring it back until the end step, I generally don't want to play it. Ghostly Flicker, I mentioned earlier, you can exile. It doesn't have to be creatures. It can be artifacts or lands you control. Sometimes I do pick lands because I do need some more mana. But Ghostly Flicker is a great card. It's probably my favorite. I don't know. I love Ghostly Flicker and Displace. And then I do play the 4-drop one, Illusionist Stratagem. Exile up to 2 target creatures you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control, draw a card. So this lets us draw, which is great. But the double the flicker, so I just want to reiterate, I like getting the most bang for my buck. So that's why I like playing bigger creatures that have better ETB effects, and I like playing cards that are giving me multiple flickers off one card. I just feel like the advantage is better. Okay, that's it for the deck profile. Hope you guys enjoyed. We're right at 25 minutes. Yarok is a really fun deck. Like I said, I feel like I've been playing it for like 3 years now, so I feel like I know it pretty well. I'm not going to pretend like it's a hard deck necessarily because you do get so much advantage, but sometimes if your opponents just keep knocking Yarok out of the game, it does feel like you're just kind of behind because all your normal effects that you're like, yeah, this is really good with a doubling, it just doesn't happen and you just kind of fall behind. But Yarok's incredibly fun. At one point, my buddies were saying it was the most powerful deck I had. I don't think it's that anymore, but it is pretty damn good, and I'm looking forward to test that. I'm going to test this deck tomorrow, hopefully against my buddies, and see how it does revamped. But anyway, that's it for the deck profile. Hope you guys enjoy. I renamed the channel Casual Card Games because from now on, I do want to be covering Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic on the same channel. There might be some people that like both. If you only like one, I hope you still stick around because it's not like you're not going to get one or the other content you prefer on a regular basis. Okay, that's it. Hope you guys had a great day. Have a good one.